Good evening. Welcome to the Comprehensive Plan Update Committee meeting of
June 1st.
June 1st, 2021. Want to welcome everybody back. We haven't seen each other for a long, long time. I hope everybody weathered the storm well and everybody was healthy, as healthy could be during that period of time. I was told the last time we met was
February 25th.
February 25th, 2020. And of course, we were going to meet the following few weeks later, and the whole world shut down, so we haven't seen each other. And actually, we stopped working at the town hall from that period of time on until just about a year ago next week. So we've been back for a year. And when we did get back, of course, we had a lot of things to catch up on. So the comprehensive plan update was one of the things, but it was kind of down the list because there was some immediate information and projects that needed to be dealt with. On top of that, once we did get back and got back into the swing, Zach Nersinger, who was kind of spearheading the writing campaign for you to get to the final product, left us and became the director of planning in the city of Yonkers, New York. So he left us, which kind of left us in a little bit of a lurch. Thank God we had Doug Sangster, who picked up the reins and kind of started putting everything back together for us. It's taken a long time, and Doug will probably tell you in a few minutes that the initial plan was to try to update the existing document that we had prior to COVID. But once he got into that document, a lot of it was outdated material. A lot of it was material that really wasn't even germane to what's happening in Penfield anymore. So we had to start rewriting section by section. We have gotten to a point, I think at this point in time, where we're fairly comfortable. We're getting to a point where we can actually hand you over something in a couple of weeks to start reviewing for us and getting comments back to us. So we wanted to get back together with you, try to get the ball rolling again, get everybody back online. And we had a few things that we have to talk about as well after we deal with the document itself. We were in the process of reviewing various properties for determination of whether or not they should be rezoned as the property owners were requesting. You did a good job of getting through most of them. We have about 3 or 4 left that we have to look at with you and get a feel from what you think about it so that we can get recommendations to the town board. We do have a few people on this evening that own those properties, and they're going to be talking to you directly about what their intent is. After they're done, we can talk about it in more detail, and then if you're comfortable this evening, we can talk about it to a point where you can or cannot make a recommendation. But we would like to get a recommendation one way or the other fairly soon, because these people have been waiting now for over a year for these kinds of decisions to be made, and certainly they've got plans for their properties, which I'm sure they'll share with you, that we can discuss to see how viable they are for what you're thinking in terms of the property's zoning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug, and we can get into the agenda.
All right, so we'll jump right into the rezonings. But before that, I just want to let you know, we have been working on the document over the past year, mostly on the second half, I believe, just before we sort of all went into quarantine. We had gone through sort of a 50% draft where we looked at the beginning half of the document. Staff has really been working on that second half, a lot of the implementation items and sort of the goals and guidelines of things we want to see developing in the community in the next the next 15 years is the document life of this document. So staff has been diligently working on that, and we're hoping to get something to you guys here soon.
I think we're looking to move in a similar fashion as we did in the first half. We'll give you guys a section or two as homework. As soon as we get those, we'll get those out to you. We get to the end of the meeting, we'll look to schedule our next meeting, but as we did before, here's a section or two to look at ahead of time, come back with comments, and then we'll work through it similar to what we did before, kind of section by section. So it's not, hey, here's all of it, but here's the section we're going to talk about tonight. Economic development, I think, is one of the first sections we've been working on. Look to send that out so we give you guys an opportunity 2 weeks ahead of time to review that, go through the document, come back with comments. We'll come back here and sit and hash it out as we've done before. So just to kind of share, it's a similar format to what we did once before, and kind of look to continue with that, and obviously looking for your guys' input, feedback, and whatnot as we move along. So here we are a year later and back at it. Hopefully, thank you to those that have stuck with us, and I think we've got a couple others that couldn't make it tonight, but are looking to continue on with us as well. So hopefully we'll stay strong with the group that we have. But as Jim said, we've got a couple of guests tonight that had put in requests for rezoning as long ago, was February of last year. We had that scheduled and queued up for our March meeting, and then obviously the March meeting went away. So they've been waiting for a little while, and again, similarly, as we did some of the other reviews and kind of looked at the property, Doug's got the maps up. For those in the audience here, you've got the monitors up, down, and below. You can kind of watch those, as well as the big screen here. It's a little different than our setup in the back, and our projector and everything else. We've upgraded technology a little bit, as you kind of saw coming in and going out, but hopefully we can use the technology to the best of our abilities, and Doug can kind of lead us through. Any questions, comments from the group before we jump in, proceed? No, it's been a year and we're throwing a lot at you all of a sudden to go, hey, we're back and let's get going. But obviously we're looking to get
We know you're up to the task.
get back in.
You're a tough guy.
You did well before, and we're looking to, we got the group back and keep on moving, so.
It will be nice to have closure on something.
We agree.
Yeah. Obviously, none of us expected the past year and the gap time and everything else, and we would have hoped to have had this concluded by now and gone through it, but again, glad you're all still with us and happy to keep going.
With that.
All right, we'll start with the first rezoning. Let's start with Ryan Morse and 1506 Empire Boulevard. Pull it up.
Good evening, Ryan.
Pull it up here on the screen for you guys.
We initially started to talk about Ryan's project. This is the old Hilltop Nursery property, farm market property. The property, since 1981, has been zoned R-1-12, which is single-family residential, 12,000-acre lots. I think what they were trying to do initially back in the late 70s, early 80s, was to try and create a transitional residential buffer from the properties to the east, and then onto Empire Boulevard. Nobody's shown any interest in the R-112 district, particularly on Empire Boulevard, and I can understand that. So I think the last time we talked, not knowing exactly what Ryan was interested in doing, we looked at the possibility of rezoning that property to LB and MR, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes, that's correct.
multi-residential. And then COVID kicked in, and we really never got a chance to discuss it in any further detail. During that period of time, after we met, I've talked to Ryan, the staff has talked to Ryan on several occasions. Ryan's indicated that he would be more interested in having the property rezoned to a LaSalle's Landing Zone, which is directly across the street in the olive color there. And I'm going to let Ryan talk a little bit about what his intent is with the property, recognizing that there are single-family residences to the east. There is a change in grade on the property. Pretty much where the development is at grade at the street level, but the area to the back does climb fairly quickly into their backyards with a big grade change there. So, Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about to the committee what your intent is and what you're thinking about for that property?
Okay, thanks. What I've decided, over the last year and a half to 2 years, just getting input from many different people and builders and developers in the town, that residential development would be best. And I am going to push for LaSalle's Landing because it is so close to the bay and it's right across the street from LLD zone there. And just my feeling is that it'd be best to create a residential development for people that want to be close to the water-oriented recreational uses and close to the bay and the wetlands there. And it feels like it should be LLD. I'm going with that.
Ryan, are you thinking about multi-residential apartment-type dwelling units?
Yes, yes.
Is there a reason then why you would not be interested in continuing the multi-residential zoning district that's to the north of you, immediately to the north of you, where I believe that's Hill Haven that's next to you?
Yep.
Because that would afford you the same kind of use as if you had LaSalle's Landing.
Okay, would that allow for the possibility of a combination of residential development as well as possibly an eatery or a coffee shop or something like that, some maybe retail shops.
No,
It's-
that's a mixed-use zone, and that would require LaSalle's Landing or mixed-use development, probably more like a LaSalle's Landing zone in that
LaSalle's
area.
Landings would allow both.
Is that what you're looking to do on the site?
I just want to keep the options open. I've been given some opinions that this is probably the best way to go. Just to keep the options open.
Okay.
But residential development seems to be the use that everybody really agrees on.
That's fine. I just want to make the committee aware of the fact that there are some height differentiations between the two districts. So for instance, on the LaSalle's Landing district, the town board has jurisdiction over that district. The town board can make a determination as to how high or how low the development, the residential development could be in that district. And you've seen that along Empire Boulevard where they've had 4-story buildings, 3-story buildings in some cases. The MR district, the multi-residential district, I believe allows for no more than 2 stories in height. And the reason I bring that up is because of the concern that I would expect property owners to the east that live on those, in that residential tract would be concerned about the height of the buildings, maybe blocking views of Empire Boulevard, blocking views. I don't know what kind of a view they actually get of the bay, but blocking views of areas that, they've had open air views for the last 50 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you are in a situation where you would work with the town board to keep the buildings at a lower level than what they'd be allowed to in LaSalle's Landing normally, and the board has that ability to change it if they want to, if they think that that's an impact to the neighbors, then LaSalle's Landing might be a good use in terms of multi-types of uses on the site. If you're just looking for townhouse, or looking for commercial development in its own right, certainly the MR would not fly for you. You'd want to have LaSalle's Landing or a limited business zone, something of that nature. And then finally, if you're looking just for apartment dwelling units, MR might be an opportunity for you to continue on with what's there already with Hill Haven's site, which is also zoned multi-residential.
Okay. Well, the property's got quite a slope to it, and it's a hill, and it would have to be dug down quite a bit to flat ground to do any type of development there. So I was hoping for a 4-story building, but by doing this, you're going to create a big wall or a nice buffer for those houses that are behind, and they won't lose their view. But with 4 stories, we could all enjoy the view of the city skyline. That's the best part of this property, is that along the horizon you see Rochester, the city, and it's especially beautiful at night. So whatever is done here, I'd like to be, a high-end type of a place with unique architectural character, kind of a thing, make it special.
You do have some limitations in the fact that you do need to have setback buffer zone requirements for the LaSalle's Landing District to those residences. And that is, that's at the discretion of the town board. They're going to be looking to have some kind of a buffer so those buildings are not right in their backyards next to the swimming pools. So that's something to take into consideration. The other thing, too, is are you looking to do first floor parking in those buildings? Are you looking for parking lots to accompany the units? Because you really don't have that much area if you're looking at multi-residential structures.
Or multi-story.
Right. I would hope for a mix of outdoor parking and underground parking.
And your intent would be to change the grade of that hill to incorporate buildings closer to the east than they are right now. Are you looking at a retaining wall, or how would you envision being able to hold back the remaining grade that's to the east of the property?
Yes, retaining wall.
Doug, I can't tell the grade elevations. Can you
Can you blow that up?
Highlight just what the difference in grade is from maybe Empire, is it 405?
Yeah, so Empire's around 405. It's flat around where the existing farm structures are. From there, it rises up about 410, 415, right behind those structures, and then it's a gradient up from about 415 to 440 at the base level of the houses.
So we got about
Backyards
35
of the
feet
houses.
between Empire Boulevard level and the backyard of the houses. So a four-story building, those residents are going to be looking into the third story, fourth story of that building. So I don't know if a four-story building would quite fit there, given the existing grades and elevation. I mean, not looking to
Well, yes.
design it here, but
Maybe some landscaping would be better for them. Trees.
well, I mean, I think it's part of, I mean, the committee can look at and comment on a rezoning, but just as you know, if the committee is supportive of moving forward, I would think any board, whether town board, planning board, would want to do some cross-section elevations, look at what the view shed is. If I'm in the backyard, I'm sorry, but, you know, rezoning to go from R112 to a four-story building, now that I'm looking from a residential property into the fourth floor of a residential building,
Or even the roof
I'd have
of
some
a
concerns as that resident, and I don't think some shrubs or trees is going to, you know, change that much. So just, obviously, that's up to a future board, that's up to a future, whether planning board, town board, whoever this jurisdiction falls under, but just be aware, I would think any board that we've got would want to see a cross-section view sheds. That's a normal, typical thing that we look at, and, you know, what is the view shed for those neighbors going to be? So a four-story building may be a bit of a stretch, I'm thinking, in this location.
There are a lot of trees. There are a lot of trees, a wooded area on the backside of that property as it is right now. So that's what they're looking at right now is just shrub.
And that's why I
like-
say, I don't know the view shed, I haven't been out there, so I'm just trying to, you know,
Yeah, they wouldn't be losing anything. It would only become a better view for them, even if it were new planted trees of some type.
So your intent is not to encroach in the area where the trees are located now?
Those trees might have to be replaced, but no, not go beyond that point.
Well, I go back to what Mark is saying. I suspect that the town board, if this were zoned to LaSalle's Landing, would be concerned about people on the third and fourth floor looking down into the residences that already exist on those properties. That's something we're going to have to take into consideration as we look to whatever zoning is appropriate for this site. I do agree that R112 is probably not the right zoning for this property. You have a 4-lane state highway running back and forth, and there's been no interest on anybody's part to develop that for 12,000 square foot single-family residences. So there's got to be some kind of a happy median, I think, between the two.
Mm-hmm.
any thoughts from the committee?
How large is this parcel?
2.9 acres.
2.9.
How many units total are you thinking, even regarding 3 or 4 floors?
It's not possible to say. I can't say at this time because really need to know what's going to be allowed to happen there before I could calculate that.
I mean, as the committee discusses, we shared, I mean, if you recommended, you know, multi-residential, I think is where we were last time we went around, either multi-residential or limited business in that location. Even if the board was, or the committee was to, you know, recommend LaSalle's Landing, that doesn't guarantee that it gets 4 stories or anything. You know, obviously that's still a discussion, negotiation, 1, for the town board to decide to rezone it and support the recommendation, and 2, once they get into site plan, look at those view sheds, the impacts to the neighbors, setbacks, as Jim had shared, so.
The properties that would be impacted, the residential properties that would be impacted by a change from what it is now, those look like pretty substantial homes.
Yeah,
To me.
that's off of.
What neighborhood is that?
Creek Street, so it's a Littlewood Lane. If you go back to Creek Street, it's kind of an access in.
Yeah, it comes off of Cliffview, which is just, if you've been to Sunscape, it's right down the road from Sunscape. It is a newer neighborhood. Cliffview, Peak Hill Drive were built in the mid-'60s to late '60s. I believe Littlewood Lane West was added sometime in the mid to late '90s or early 2000s.
So what would, and I'm going to guess, I would address this maybe to Jim and Mark or Doug. If a large multi-unit structure were built there, even if it had lots of trees, let's say, what would you estimate the impact to those property owners' home values would be? Would it go up? Would it go down? Would it stay the same?
Well, who knows at this point in time, because the housing market in this part of the country is out of control anyways.
Well,
That's
but I
not
mean-
necessarily going to be the case always. I think
Right.
what the town board looks at, and I've been working with them now for several years on LaSalle's Landing, we just spent over 2 years looking at view sheds for a property behind the K2 Brewery for a 60-unit apartment building to make sure that the people that were 100 feet above it were looking down, trying not to see the roof lines.
Right.
So I can only imagine the board looking at this with a lot of scrutiny to say, we're not going to, put 3 and 4 stories on a property that's going to have people looking in the back windows of those homes 24/7. So a 2-story building possibly, I could see that happening there, but that could be done with multi-residential zoning. If you wanted to do some commercial, I understand that. I mean, it's a busy highway and there's commercial all around it. But, the town board would have jurisdiction over any height restrictions or any density restrictions. They say what you can and can't do there. It's kind of a weird zoning district. It's not like the other ones in town where you have specific, numbers in terms of height, in terms of density, in terms of green space. This one is kind of a hybrid where they determine, how they feel it relates to the properties around it and what kind of impact it might have to it. So even if we went with MR or if we went with LaSalle's Landing, they would still have to say what they thought was appropriate in terms of use. He might be disappointed if we went with LaSalle's Landing because they might not give him more than 2 stories based on what the topography is out there. But, that's going to be up to him and the board if that's what you recommend for the site. And knowing the town board, I'm certain they'll be very, very stringent upon how that impacts the neighbors around them.
So the ultimate question here is really whether the recommendation would be for the multi or for the LaSalle's Landing. That's really what's on the table. And the LaSalle's Landing gives the property owner some flexibility to be able to do some commercial.
Commercial, yeah.
Because ultimately, no matter what gets put in there, it's going to have to go through the planning board, and they're going to scrutinize it. And so I think most of the height questions and things like that will be answered by them. It's more about how much flexibility do we think the property actually could sustain.
Well, with LaSalle's Landing, it'll only go through the town board.
Yeah, that's the only
MR will go through the
differentiation.
planning board or any of the other districts, but LaSalle's Landing and Four Corners are 2 unique districts in town that the town board has the ultimate jurisdiction, not the planning board or zoning board.
So if I were to go out on a limb here, I would imagine that both of those are going to scrutinize that very carefully.
Yes.
It wouldn't matter whether it's the planning board or the town board. Nothing's going to
Yes,
get by
they'll both
without a high degree of review and scrutiny.
Yeah, I can't, to be perfectly honest, Ryan, I cannot believe that a 4-story building, unless it's, not going to impact the neighbors to the east, would be even considered by the town board if it were to go to LaSalle's Landing. Although I do agree with you in the sense that, obviously we're not looking at a general business zone, which would allow for big box development, that type of thing, although you don't have a lot of property to work with there. But if you wanted to have some kind of small business uses in there, restaurant uses, you could go to LaSalle's Landing only because that would give you a mixed use for their property. It's probably the only one that's reasonable that would give you that, because even LB doesn't give you the ability to put apartments or even single-family residential use on that property. So if you were going to do a mix of uses, you might be able to get away with a mix of uses that meets your needs, but it may not be a 4-story building by the time you get done.
Okay.
Question about the parking also, kind of going back to that issue, especially if you're going to have mixed use with retail, unless it's, I I forget the designation for like low-traffic retail, like a lawyer's office or a dentist's office or something like that. But, so kind of two questions. How much kind of parking based on what kind of retail? And I'm not expecting an answer for this because it's all up in the air.
Right,
but-
because we don't know.
But-
just generally speaking, we look at parking for retail use at about 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of usable area.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a little bit different for restaurants. It's based on occupancy of the restaurant. I think it's 1 space for each 1.5 people of legal occupancy, and then 1 space for each employee on the site at any given shift. So there are all these formulas you kind of have to play with to put them in place.
Well, we
to
also
make it work.
reference ITE as a traffic industry standard. They do analysis of restaurants across the country of this size, or Walgreens or whatever, and then they tell you how many trips per hour you have coming in. So that's what the DOT is going to be looking for. It's off Empire Boulevard, so any work is going to have to get approval from state DOT for curb cut entrances. They look at traffic generation, what's the use on the site, how many cars per hour, what's the impact, is the peak hour. It's also things the boards are going to look at, knowing Empire Boulevard's a very busy area. Peak hour, you're going to have difficulty coming in or out at the, 7 to 9 area or the PM area, so that may affect what type of restaurant goes there or what retail use and everything else if you have trouble making lefts in
So
or out.
that's-
If it went all residential, is there any idea how many units could be, I mean, I know you can't tell for sure, but any idea how many units?
Well,
I'm just
it's
concerned,
an oddly shaped property of 2.9 acres. If it's MR, theoretically, there has to be an 80-foot buffer around the perimeter of the property on all 4 sides. That's a requirement in the MR zone.
it seems like kind of a tight site, so would you be able to work the traffic onto Empire safely? Because
That's going to be up to the engineering that's
pretty
done for it
busy
and
intersection
the
there.
state DOT. Now, the other part of this that we haven't talked about is since we've last seen you, we've had the apartment building on the Daniele property go up, and we've had the approval for this other project behind K2. And the reason why that got approved, and it was approved under incentive zoning, was because the applicant offered things to the town to try to mitigate some of the issues that are occurring down in that area. And what he did was he offered to install a continuation of the middle turn lane that was originally built as part of the Water's Edge project. And the Danielles also had to contribute to that as part of their project. So that will be extended further on down beyond Wilbur Tract Road. The town boards also determined, based on staff recommendations, that any new construction, not so much a change of use, but any new construction on Empire Boulevard will help contribute to the extension of that turn lane going up the hill towards Plank Road as well. So any new development will have to contribute some fee, and as Mark indicated, it's basically based on the ITE studies as to what a restaurant generates versus what a jewelry shop generates versus what an apartment generates. So there is a formula there for that. So any new development will have to participate in that improvement on Empire Boulevard. So that's another reason why you might want to, those people have to, the more they get, the more they have to pay. So it's prorated based on the size of the project. That being said, though, I mean, still a 4-story building kind of seems to be out of the realm of reality for that site. I won't say it can't happen because I've seen things happen in the past, but working with the board as I have over the last several decades, I know that they're very cautious in making sure that neighbors are not adversely impacted by any new development as best as they possibly can. So he may need to have some commercial users on that site to help offset the costs that would be associated with highway improvements as part of the project.
what about your mixed use?
Mixed use would allow for this type of thing as well. It's just that you're just kind of sticking a mixed use zone. It's not spot zoning because you've got other commercial uses around it and residential uses. It's just that it's not really, anywhere in close proximity to the rest of this area. So it may look like we just stuck it in there to just to accommodate. The mixed use district basically is kind of the same as the LaSalle's district. In that case with the mixed use district, the planning board has the authority and the jurisdiction over heights of building and densities of building and how much green space you need, how much parking you need. So it's kind of the same kind of things, the same principles. It's just under two different zoning districts, that's all. So it wouldn't offend me if he went to LaSalle's Landing District. It's just that to get to the maximum that he's interested in, I don't know if that's possible based on what we know about the property right now and what we know with the neighborhood next to it. That's something they would have to draw plans to show how they're not going to have adverse view impacts to the neighbors.
One last question about the parking. When Mr. Morse is talking about kind of potentially having underground parking there.
Right.
What is the water table like there? Would it
Well, I will tell you,
sustain
that's a very good
digging
question,
that out?
actually. That should not be an issue unless there's some type of perched water table on the other properties to the east. But I will tell you that the Daniele building and all the other buildings to the north of it they do have that first floor parking. And actually, staff actually asked that same question with respect to the Daniele building because it is pretty close to the surface of the bay, but they are above the floodplain. They're probably.
You're talking the lowest one, Bellagio's the
Yes,
one,
the
the newest
Bellagio.
one that just went in where Mario's used to be.
They have 98 underground, it's not really underground, it's first floor parking spaces. So they are above the base flood elevation for floodplain. They're not within the floodplain area, so they're in pretty good shape. They ran into no water issues while they were constructing it. So I don't think that Ryan would experience anything like that on this site. He's much, much higher.
We would make them still do deep holes if that was proposed, do deep holes ahead of time, see where, if there is, as Jim said, a perched water table, that would come in on kind of the engineering review as
What's
we
the
get that
soil
far.
conditions there?
Well, that's a good question,
Most of
too.
it is fill, isn't it?
Charles, I'm not so certain in this case, but it may be. I mean, I would strongly urge Ryan to do some testing on the site, not so much on this property, but further to the south, where we talked about Mazout Vardar's property, keep going, right there. We had actually one time had approved a mosque, a Turkish mosque on that site, and it received approval, and then shortly after they had received approval, they started doing test holes because it was a fairly heavy structure they were going to put on the property, and it is all blow sand there. And they found out that that area had been filled over the years prior to, any of us being around, with a lot of cinder ash from the city furnaces, and they could not support the weight of that building without going down 90 feet or so before they got to a point where there was bedrock to hold it, and that kind of put the kibosh on that project. A lot of Empire Boulevard in that area was filled over the years, and I'm not certain what's there. A lot of those buildings have spread footers. They don't have basements. I'm not certain about the Hilltop. Hilltop might be a little bit of a different situation because Hilltop actually was owned by Mr. Bauman, and Mr. Bauman died almost at 100 years old a couple of years ago, and he was the farmer that owned all that land around, and it was farmland. So, I mean, I don't know if he or his ancestors would have permitted any type of dumping like that on Empire Boulevard where he was.
No,
So
but it
he
might
may
be
not have the
tough to- It
problems.
might be tough to find good bearing, especially for a four-story building.
Well, I mean, that's something that the boards would all look to as part of the engineering study, whether it's geotechnical or drainage or whatever the case may be. Even the retaining wall that he's proposing, we would have to have, engineering details about how that's going to be tied in and not become a problem in terms of, falling away or doing whatever it might do. So, I mean, that's just part of the process in any event. But I would say that if any of the properties were not in a situation is similar down to the low areas, because the low areas were so low, they were just trying to dump stuff down there to bring it up so they could put something on it. That's not necessarily the case here. This was farmland for a long, long time, and he still has the farm buildings there that were there, back in the 30s and 40s. So I'm not so certain that we'd have that problem, but that would have to be looked at as part of the review process.
Any other comments, questions for Mr. Morse?
Would it be to your advantage as a group to go out and take a look at this property to get a better
Last
feel
year,
for
didn't
it?
We saw, I think we went out there.
We
I think we did
kind of
drive by
did.
it.
We drove by.
It was a drive-by. I was thinking maybe even going over onto the residential property and looking back down and see what kind of landscaping is there already Certainly, I think that if there's a mature stand of trees there, any board reviewing it would want to preserve as much of that stand of trees as possible.
So if the group would want to hold off on this one, we can hold it till our next meeting and then
Well, I think we need
in the between now and then, take a look at.
specific question from, Mr. Moore saying what he wants zoning to be.
Well,
Well, I
he's-
think he wants it to be LaSalle's Landing because he wants mixed use there. The question is, can he tolerate not having a four-story building as part of that mixed-use development?
In the meantime, the group can, say, drive by, take another look. I know we talked about, limited business or an MR last year. LaSalle's a little bit different. You're introducing that you could have a restaurant there, you can have some more commercial uses there. Obviously, LaSalle's, you can still have, apartment buildings there. It doesn't, just because it's rezoned, LaSalle's Landing doesn't guarantee 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories. That's up to a future board. But I think getting a look, I'd like to look from Littlewood Lane and, get some visuals from their level into the backyard, what, that looks like. We can provide the committee, in the meantime, those elevation contours, so as you're standing out there and you can envision something 30 feet below it or pull on the site and look and, I think Doug hit it about 35, 40 feet up, what that might look like as well. So we can provide that to you guys, and then everybody can kind of do their own informal tour between now and the next meeting.
Yep.
Great.
Sounds
Good
like
plan.
consensus
Any
on
other
that.
environmental restrictions on the property?
Well, not that we're aware of at this point, Roland. As I say, a lot, if anything, it was farmland, and traditionally farmland, if they were orchards, may have some pesticide issues that we'd want to look at. I'm thinking there's, in terms of, dumping materials, that kind of thing, a lot of that happened down the hill more. It didn't happen in this area up here based on what we've seen with other development that's occurred in that area. So I don't think he's going to run into that problem. But, I mean, it's just a matter of, whoever's reviewing the project for any proposal, those are the kind of questions that will be asked, and certainly if testing needs to be done, they'll require testing for that as part of the site plan review process.
Say there's no known wetlands, floodplain is well above the floodplain, so on basic environmental stuff, there's nothing with that, but.
He doesn't really have any environmental protection districts on the site, so that's to his advantage.
Yeah, I don't believe there are any on the site. Yes, is it?
Those are slopes?
Yeah,
Those
so
are
it's not,
slopes,
it's
yeah.
not steep
Slope
slopes, not woodlot, not
No.
wetland or,
No, the property's really not
Water
big enough
course.
to accommodate any of those.
Yep.
So we'll talk about this again at the next meeting in more detail?
and
And
then,
Ryan, you'll join us at the next meeting?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions or comments you want to make?
No, I don't have any at this time.
All right, we'll have the committee take a look. We'll provide them with some material in more detail of your property, and then we'll talk about it again at the next meeting.
and then, Mr. Morris, just to put on the record, you're okay with the committee members stopping at your property and taking a walk around? You authorize them to access
Yep,
your
that's
property?
good, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, just want to make sure you got that on the record.
Yep. Yep, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
You too.
All right. The second rezoning request we got is regarding a number of properties out in Penfield Center.
Can you put the zoning, put the zoning district on there as well?
Yep. Yeah, I'm just going to get to an aerial that doesn't
Yeah.
glitch. I'll see if I can pull that up. I don't think I have a copy of it. So the next rezoning request, we have the Smith on Zoom with us. They own property between Northrop and Plank Road, Route 250, sort of in that corner. It includes essentially 1265 and 1271 Plank Road, and then about 1220 through 1258 Northrop Road. Not all those properties are owned by them, but they have been in discussions with their neighbors regarding the potential for rezoning it to higher density of development. So they did send in a letter that we received, I believe, in March of 2020, right around the time that we shut down operations at Town Hall. Looking to rezone areas of these properties that were within the potential sanitary sewer basin for the Forest Ridge. It's now called Rocco Pines subdivision that was approved for 1394 and 1440 Jackson Road to change their zoning there from RA2 to R120 to allow half-acre development, and then any property that is outside of the potential sewer basin or area that could possibly be served by future sewer to RR1, our rural residential 1 acre zoning.
And some of the rationale for that was the property that Doug had just referenced, the subdivision was a 72-lot subdivision. The owners of that property at one time were also interested in rezoning to R120. But as they were asking for R120, they actually had an application in for 72 lots, which was a 1 acre zoning allowance. So the comment, I think the committee's comment was if they're already developing the site for 72 units, why would we rezone it? Because the intent was already there to move forward with that project. So that project is moving forward now as a 72-unit allowable R1 zoning.
Well, they came in as a cluster or Town Law 278 development, so the lots that will be developed on that site aren't going to be compliant with the 1 acre zoning. They will be smaller.
But the number of lots will be compliant.
But the number of lots.
And there will be a lot of green space associated with the remaining lots that are there. So I think in discussing that with the Smiths, I think, and certainly you can relay what your thoughts are, Gary, but I think now what they're looking at with the impending development of that project, construction has already started in terms of site work. They would like to mirror that kind of density so that they could go in and do something similar to what's being done on the Rocco Pines subdivision. A lot of their properties at this point in time, much of the property isn't sewered at this time, but a portion of it will be sewered as part of that Rocco Pines project. So they're just looking in advance for the ability to do similar things on their properties as being done just to the west of them.
The Smiths,
Yeah, and Gary, you're on.
you guys want
Are
to?
you?
Yeah, that's correct. We were looking to do pretty much just mirror whatever they're doing at the Rocco. We are zone 2A for some reason. I don't know how on the other side of the hedgerow they were zone 1A, but we ended up being 2A. So we were looking to just the same density that they're allowing Rocco Pines to allow us the opportunity to have that same density.
So you'd be,
part of to work correctly.
you'd be looking for a 1 acre zoning then to extend
If that's
that or
what they're-
move
that's all
that
they're
1 acre zone?
wanting over at Rocco Pines, yes.
So did you say they were looking to leverage the sewer capacity that was part of that current project?
Yeah, so I pulled up Forest Ridge, or it's now Rocco Pines up. So as part of that, they are looking to bring in a regional pump station that will pump either up Jackson Road or down Shoecraft Road into the Webster sewer system. A lot of the north side of Penfield is serviced by Webster sewers. So as part of that, they had to, when sizing the pump station, they had to show what areas could gravity to that pump station and be pumped out, just to show where future development could occur and where they would be able to potentially tie into that sewer. So as part of their development, they did provide a sanitary basin map of areas based on their topography, where they believe could drain to that pump station and be pumped further out, which does include a property owned by the Smiths. So in that one, they are looking to do higher density because it could be serviced at least in the near to immediate future by sanitary sewers. At this point, there aren't sewers in the area until that development moves forward to the west and they reach an agreement with Webster. There aren't sewers technically available yet, but once there are, they would be within a short distance.
So I thought last year you were telling us that the Webster sewer was at capacity.
It was at capacity, and we have been in discussions, ongoing discussions with Webster about, they are doing upgrades on their side to increase capacity. What that means for Penfield and the availability for capacity for us, really does vary. One of the issues in this area is up at the intersection, or just a little east of the intersection of State and Jackson. They do have a pipe restriction, which restricts the amount of flow that we can send north through that area. We have, the town has looked at doing a bypass around that to allow for greater flows coming from Penfield flowing north into Webster. We're still in works with that, and Mark can tell you a little bit more about that on the engineering side.
Yeah, we're waiting to come up with a final agreement with whatever that number is with Webster. They had to do upgrades to their sewer treatment plant, which has been ongoing, even nearing completion. But as Doug had shared, there is a restriction in the corner, so we have a mutual agreement between the two towns. We'll make a bypass connection that'll bypass that area. So Webster actually paid for the new Visca development to upsize their pipe from an 8 to a 12. They knew they had the restriction. So then we will make a connection across from Thistleberry, right where Doug's got it right there, that will bypass the flow coming down State Road, which will benefit the town of Penfield. Now we have more sewer availability for our residents flowing into Webster. So we're just looking to finalize that
I'm
agreement.
not sure that's a benefit.
So
That's
will
in
it-
the eye of the beholder, but,
So will that increase capacity, I guess, well, that's probably not a question we need to concern ourselves with a whole lot, but is the current development that's being done already have an agreement in place with Webster?
they are waiting for the final agreement with Webster to be signed. There is, if they can't go north to Webster, they can go west down Plank Road and tie in at Shoecraft. So it's a little bit longer of a run. They've committed to either way. They said either we're going north to Webster, or if Webster doesn't come through, we do have capacity, and that goes straight to the county facility. So if you go straight down Plank Road, and it ties in at Shoecraft. So they've got two options. So one, they have a guaranteed at Shoecraft and Plank. There's a connection and a pipe and manhole there already. Webster, if the Webster agreement comes into place, they can go north to Webster, and it's a little bit short of a run. So they've committed in the project. They're going to go either way. As Doug had showed, that sewer shed, the town of Penfield has taken the stance that we don't take pump stations for just one subdivision. So Rocco Pines, it was Forest Ridge, came in and said, we just want our 72 homes. Here's our pump station. The town of Penfield says, no, we're not going to take, otherwise we'll have hundreds of pump stations for each development, and they are additional work, they're additional maintenance. We say you need to service or put in a regional pump station. So as
So
part
that
of
was my, you've anticipated.
I'm
my
leading
second
into the next
question,
piece
which is the capacity for that pump station
And-
such that it can handle.
Or upgradable. So Doug
Yeah.
showed that sewer shed there. So I'm not saying that pump station can take all of the Smith property, but the pump station is upgradable. You can change out impellers, you can change out pumps if and when that, at that point in time comes. But all of the area that's in that sewer shed there is accommodated in their pump design currently. So that's what can get there by gravity, and we make sure that they can take that regionally. I mean, we've got homes that are, Cassidy Court is built out. They've got septic today. If and when someday their septic system failed and they wanted to tie in, now they've got the opportunity that they could connect and tie over. There's some homes on Jackson Road in the frontage. They've called and asked and said, hey, if our septic fails, is there opportunity for us? So, we kind of look out and say, okay, what drainage basin can you have, sewer shed you can have? So the developer of Rocco Pines is sizing a pump station larger than what they need for their development, but for the town to take acceptance of it, we can say it's got to be a regional piece. It can't be just to serve your subdivision. So as part of it, as we try to always be a little forward-looking, we provided a stub, so the Berry properties across the street, they may have the opportunity to tie into it, as well as providing easements and opportunities that, the Smith property, they could, connect into it. So there's access easements between some lots if they wanted to run sanitary over.
So the piece of property that doesn't fall into the gravity section, I guess that's my next
They,
question.
I mean, at some point in time, they may come in and maybe they've got other residents on Northrop Road, and Northrop Road, as a group, comes in and says, hey, we've been here for years, our septic systems are failing, can we look to put in a gravity system, which then you'd find where the low spot is. It may drain down to the low corner by the Smith property at 250 in Northrop, and then maybe that would be the spot for a future regional pump station, which would tie
Yeah,
over
so
to
the
that
question
one.
would
and
be
then-
is if we do R1 for all of the property, for that other section, was a 1 acre lot sufficient? Is that acceptable from the town regulation perspective to
that's-
have septic for now?
Yeah, that's our minimum for septic. So
Okay.
That's why it's
R1 would
1
keep
acre.
it, so you can do septic, you can meet the health department requirements for septic. If and when, sanitary sewer became available or they wanted to expand that, then
But the set-aside approach that could be used for the one section of the property where they could put a certain number of homes and then do a set-aside would not for the 1 acre. It's got to truly be 1 acre lots to support the.
I mean, they can do similar with the Rocco Pines, that's a 1 acre zoning there as well. They used, going back to Town Law 278, we talked about that quite a few times.
I realize that,
tended to
but that will
cluster.
work for, that'll work for this, where
They
they
could
have the
cluster
sewer
that
hookup,
piece
yeah.
there and, yeah.
But the lower, this section there, that would still have to be real 1 acre lots in order to support, okay. And
Until-
are-
until
and are they-
sanitary sewer
Are
survey.
the requesters familiar, that would be a limitation?
I believe they are, and I think they're anticipating that they're probably not going to be developing that until sanitary sewers are provided for that site. But they want to get that done in anticipation of that happening. As Mark said, once this occurs, another pump station, a regional pump station may accommodate those other areas, including their area, so.
So as Doug's brought up the zoning map, you'd almost be moving that, you can see the divide between the light green and the dark green, you'd move that dark green line over, so you're just kind of extending where 1 acre is, and then recrafting that kind of around that block. We talked about the properties to the north, if you recall, going up towards Welch's Farm Market. This group talked about, rezoning that down to some higher density, south of Abington. We looked at the Falvo piece. We already have LB where it used to be Harriseed.
Right.
I'm not sure, what it is today. I know that's under some redevelopment, but you can see there's other areas in that block. You've got RG&E across the street. So it's not quite as rural, I say, as it once used to be with with RG&E there. You've got Harris, which is a limited business zone, just to the north of that as well.
So I had a question, how many units would that accommodate then, if we were gonna do that zoning,
I mean, dependent upon their acreage.
approximately?
If you pull up all of whatever the acreages are, it's never a one-to-one.
No,
By
I
the time you put a road in,
Right.
we're usually at 70% or some, thereabout. So if, you pull up.
So the largest piece is about 50 acres there, I think, overall.
Gary, how many acres do you own, or what's in your,
6 acres total.
I'm sorry, can you say it one more time?
We have 76 acres total.
So 76 acres, so at a 1 acre zoning, if you do roughly 70% of that, I don't have the math in my head.
67?
So, potentially if every piece of it, then you gotta fit in a pond, you gotta fit in some other stuff, so maybe 60 units.
But again, those 60 units will be compressed like the ones at Rocco Pines, then you'll have green space
If we look at
around.
I just want to redirect us just a little bit. Our mission is the comprehensive committee is a 5-year plan, right? Or
15
We're-
is-
No, we're looking at 10 or
15.
15
Okay, because of the
with the census.
census.
Right.
It's great to talk about expanding these sewers and putting all these developments in, but we don't have any kind of a plan for traffic. If you go up and down Plank Road, that's almost an expressway now. And you're gonna be dumping a lot more units between both of those projects onto that road. And I think we mentioned last year, maybe it's time to think about a comprehensive study traffic plan for the town, because it's just gonna blossom. We approve this, then the next development can tie into that sewer, and there's no infrastructure, as far as roads being considered.
That was one of your
We're gonna end up in a
recommendations for the
jam
infrastructure,
like we
was to
do
do
at-
that.
5 Mile Line and Atlantic.
Wasn't a traffic study one of the things that we were?
That's one of the items.
Community-wide traffic
I mean,
studies.
I'm trying, I have to go back to my notes, but I think you recommended that before, that they need to do that.
That's one of the items we have as our, say, items to hit is coming out of this is a recommendation to do a townwide.
But maybe this
Traffic study and look at-
rezoning requests on these individual properties should wait until we are able to get through this townwide comprehensive traffic
Just a little on the north
question.
side.
I think living on the east side, traffic is pretty bad, and I don't see a lot of thought into how we're gonna handle all this additional traffic.
Well, again, you need to remember this is a recommendation to the town board. So the town board, just because this committee recommends it, doesn't mean tomorrow, next week, 5 years, 10 years from now, the town board is going to make that rezoning. So that may
Well,
be.
and vice
that-
versa. I mean, you might recommend no rezonings, but if they come in and there's a reason to do it,
Right.
The town board
They-
may
they
still
may do it.
look to move ahead. So even if you make a
We're here for a
recommendation.
reason, and that's.
Yeah, but I'm saying.
That's my
you know,
opinion.
And that may be the town board's recommendation is, yes, we see the recommendation coming from the committee, but we'd like to wait until the study's done. So just looking out 10 or 15 years, that's why we look ahead and say, okay, does this make sense that at some point this area may make sense as a 1 acre zoning, given these other factors? But I would assume the town board would say, let's wait and do the traffic study first, and so the rezoning may take
So to
a
give you
year or
some-
2 years. Or
We can put
To
some
get-
of the
some
factors
timeframe.
in the recommendations, right? I mean, that's certainly possible for us to do that, so I would
I
say
mean, it's-
just,
So to give you some history of Penfield zoning, prior to 1981, the entire eastern portion of the town was zoned half-acre development.
Right.
That's why you see all these little streets, I'm trying to think of.
Hermance is-
Hermance is a perfect
Hermance.
example. And the reason being is because a lot of these people were having terrible septic problems back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So the town board got together with these property owners. I don't know how they pulled off such a monumental feat, but they did. And they recognized the fact that until such time as sanitary sewers were going to be available to these areas, that they would rezone them to higher densities, or I'm sorry, lower densities, so that if you had a single-family residence, you had a lot of area for leach field expansion if you needed it until such time as a sewer was available. And they did that on the RR1 zone in anticipation that they're in close proximity to the western portion of town, so those sewers would move easier towards that R1 zone. They recognized also that back in the day, Webster, Walworth, the southern portion down there in Perrington, they had no sanitary sewers, and there was never going to be, in a realistic time frame, the ability to run sewers out to that area. So they went to a 2-acre zone to make it a little more rural, but to give people more expansion area to cut down on the density until such time as sewers arrived. And we're still here, 40 years later, and there's no sewers out there. But sewers are creeping in that R1 zone now, and the intent was for those farmers to be able to develop those sites once sanitary sewers were available. I had Doug pull up the wetlands map. So some of the areas in this district that we're talking about for potential rezoning, a lot of that is in a wetland district. So you're not going to have development on those green spaces that are shown these pointing to at this point in time.
Part of that is the Amish property that we own is.
Yeah, we own this 20 acres here.
Yeah, that was deeded to us in memory of the Amish family.
I think if you also, we could recall last year, in our initial draft of the plan, one of our points was the importance of keeping farmland and open space in Penfield. And it's kind of contradicting what you're saying, that the intent of Penfield was to allow the farmers to redevelop their farms.
Right. It was to allow them to develop the property that they had.
But I think
That was their
we,
retirement program. They
we-
didn't have anything else. But in a lot of these cases here, there isn't that much farmland, if any, if I'm mistaken.
Right, but I was questioning the density and the traffic question.
Well, any development has to address traffic. I mean, every single project has to address traffic as part of its
I
project.
understand, but we're piecemealing it, approving a project here, approving a project there, and it got us into a big jam with the project there at Atlantic and Jackson. The traffic just isn't, or 5 Mile Line, the roads can't handle the traffic. So we got a lot of processes in place, including this one that would appear to approve sewers and approve the different zonings, but there's nobody other than the traffic committee that looks at what's the traffic going to be in 10 years? And we're not just looking at the little bit of housing. We're looking at the whole 10-year plan for that part of town. So I would urge us to keep that in mind when we're thinking about adding to density.
Well, that's one of your recommendations to the town board in the plan, is to do a traffic study.
Right.
Or do probably several traffic studies over a 15-year
Comprehensive
period.
town-wide traffic
Right.
study.
And we did do that, and I think it was 89, and then we've had updates in spot areas throughout the community since that period of time to address, new development wherever it may come in. Certainly, that's how the improvements at 5 Mile Line and Atlantic Avenue came to be, because we recognized the fact that both the town of Penfield and the state of New York recognized the fact that we were getting to a level of service F at that location. And as it started moving to level F, the state kicked in with the study to determine what needed to be done to bring it back to a reasonable level of service.
I just think we should be having some foresight rather than focusing on a lot of individual properties. I think we need to be envisioning 10 years out. And I haven't heard any discussions about how to deal with the traffic, that's all.
May I ask a question of the Smiths?
Sure.
Hi, my name's Donna. I'm wondering, with the 76 acres, what have you been using that for? How long have you owned it, and what have you been using that land for?
Portion of it was in the family for years. My father purchased it back in I believe it was the 40s, and it's been a farm. And recently, in the last few years, we purchased the land along Plank Road from the Currens and tied that in with our land. So that was done back, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. So that became part of our property as well. And we farm it right now, and part of it's part of the nursery, Nature's Accents. And the rest of it is, our house is on 9 acres of that on the corner, and the rest of it's farmed.
So would any of that land be retained as farmland?
Well, right now, the only land that looks like can be developed for the most part is that area that's going to be tied in with sewers. So that area would probably be the only land right now that would be something that we would consider selling down the road. Nothing that we're going to do right now.
And that's about how much of that 76 acres is the part that you think could potentially be in the sewer zone?
25 to 30 acres.
Yeah, 25.
I'm sorry, I couldn't make that
25.
out.
Approximately 25 acres,
25 acres, okay,
30 at the most.
okay. Thank you.
Thoughts of other committee members?
Are those state or federal wetlands?
Both. There's a little bit of either. Ultimately, it would come down to, they would need some delineation by a wetland specialist or wetland engineer. But based on our rough mapping that's provided by the state and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we do show both state and federal wetlands on portions of those
The
properties.
light green color is federal, and then you can see the light blue line is the state wetland, and then the 100-foot buffer is the dark blue line that's around that, just for reference. So again, those are approximate. Obviously, we use this as kind of a general guideline. It gives us an indication that there may be wetland on the property if and when somebody comes in for development. Obviously, they got to go out and get it delineated, and it could be bigger, it could be smaller, but this just gives us kind of an idea of what might be out there.
So we don't know, right now, we don't know exactly how much of the property is impacted by the wetland.
I mean, it gives us a good
It's-
approximation.
yeah,
You know,
it's
a lot of times it follows the tree lines. If you look at farm field areas, the farmers didn't farm the areas that were wet, which is more often than not wetland. So if you see a treat area, more often than not, that's pretty close to kind of where the wetland limit is. The farmers farm what they can. The rest of the area, they didn't farm, and that grows up and kind of becomes the, wooded or a treed lot. So you can kind of see the wetlands kind of follows that, a lot of that treat area.
And there's streams in there, and so in this case, a lot of this follows the stream that flows through there. I believe it's a tributary of 4 Mile Creek. In many cases, low areas around the creeks develop into flood areas that are either seasonally or permanently flooded, that develop into wetlands. So there is a creek that does flow through there, and that's, a lot of the wetlands seem to stem from that area.
So just to kind of refresh my mind, and maybe everybody else remembers this, but when a piece of property has the wetlands on it, it seems to me that, and we discussed this a little bit earlier. Let's just say, for sake of argument, it's a 100-acre piece of property, and let's say 40 acres of that is wetland.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 1 acre zoning, again, to keep the math simple. Can the developer of that land put 100 homes on 60 acres? Because that's the...
No.
Okay.
No.
Some towns in the state of New York allow that to occur.
Mm-hmm.
We've always said from day one that if it was not developable land, which a wetland is not under the state
Right.
guidelines, we would not include those numbers in that density calculation.
Yeah, so the way we handle it is generally any subdivision like this would have to go through initially a sketch plan, concept level review before the planning board. It's informal, a lot less detail is required, but you still go before the planning board and the public, and you have to detail out what you're looking to do. And in doing that, especially with the 278 where they're clustering lots, is they have to show that, they can develop however many lots they are asking for in a realistic plan. And we have them do full layout drawings of, this is how they could fit, and we did it for Rocco Pines. This is how you could fit 72 lots, because there is wetlands, on the site over here. They had to show that they could fit 72 lots, not in the wetlands, buffering with realistic, yards and road layouts and things like that to get to that number. They just can't do a formula where it's, 80% of acreage is, the number of lots developable. They have to show that they could conventionally develop the same number of lots that they're asking for as a cluster.
They would have had much more than 70, well, I shouldn't say much more. They would have had several lots more than 72 if that were the case, and we allow that to occur, or we don't allow it to occur.
So there's no set formula, so if it's a 100-acre parcel, 1 acre zoning, 40% of it is wetlands, neither does it mean they can put 100 houses, but neither does it mean that they will only be restricted to 60 houses. It has to be less than 100.
Theoretically, it would be less than 60, because you have to account for roads and
It goes
ponds
back
and
to that
things like
70%
But,
number that Mark
yeah.
was talking about earlier.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not just the house, it's the roadways, it's the drainage facilities, it's all
Sure.
sorts of other things that are going on.
They have to meet setbacks and things. You
Right.
can only fit them so well.
And then with the state, it's a little different too, because you have the wetland, but then you also have a 100-foot buffer area around that wetland, which you can't
So in
encroach
this
into
case,
either.
that's the
So-
dark blue line around this
So
light blue
they're
area.
not allowed to encroach into that area, which is the adjacent area to the wetland.
So then, going back to, the Smiths mentioned that about 25 acres of the 76 acres seem like they would be in the potential sanitary sewer basin. Is all of that 25-acre parcel kind of free and clear to
It
build
appears
sort
so,
of one house
yes.
a
It
piece?
appears
It doesn't look
Okay.
like there's any restrictions on that particular portion of the property.
Okay, so it would be rough.
We'd likely want to have an
Yeah.
engineer take a look at this area back
Yeah.
here. Because it does border, it does get close to some wetlands, and it is a treed area that lends itself to being in an area that has the potential.
And we require that in every case because, as I think one of them mentioned earlier, these wetlands have a tendency to shrink or enlarge based on certain conditions. And they're really looking at the soil types and all that type of situation as they're reviewing that.
But ultimately, the
Vegetation.
recommendation is, would we make the recommendation to go to the 1 acre lots or not? And those types of details are going to be brought to bear before any approval from the board, planning board, as far as building.
Correct.
So if there's very minimal amount of that property is on the watershed, I'm taking a look at, I don't see any reason why going to 1 acre for that, 1 acre lots for that would be problematic, especially since the neighboring area is already. Just-
Well, and you could, I mean, not to put them in a bad situation, but you could even look at, for the time being, look at the area that's sewerable at this point in time. I mean, they've got that 25 acres, which is sewerable. Maybe the recommendation would be, we'll look at the 25 acres now as a recommendation, and then as development, I mean, if another pump station is coming in to serve the rest of that area, you know, then you would look at maybe doing it for the rest of the area. I don't know. It's up to you. It's ultimately up to the town board, but I mean, in terms of recommendation, it's up to you.
It almost makes sense to me to look at the 25 acres that is going to be in the sewer district and make a decision on that, and let everything else wait until either the sewer district expands or other conditions change.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that, too. It's all pretty speculative right now, and, you know, perhaps the Smiths will actually find something different that they would like to do with that other parcel in the future, as the environment changes around here, too.
Yeah, the big problem for them is that for the area that's being served by that sanitary sewer, the rest of the area is not. The town's not going in to put sewers in. I mean, that's being done by developers as they come in and try to buy the properties. So if they bundle some properties up together and they want to extend that sewer with another pump station, I mean, that would give them the ability to come in and ask for relief if that were the case.
So it sounded like Harold was supportive of at least the 25 acres. Is that?
No, the 25 was just
the
a
consensus.
guesstimation. I don't know exactly what it is. I just threw a number out there. I don't know what it is.
Well, I think it's
actually.
really, it's really the property that's included in the sewer service area.
Yeah, so Marathon, who did the sewer basin mapping, guesstimated about 26 acres and a total of about 20 lots based on what was the current zoning, or what they could see under.
We asked them for the maximum potential of that. You know, we would look to clean up the rezonings, so it rezones to property lines and not like in the middle of their property.
Right.
So if
Right,
we said
that's-
it makes sense up to 250, sorry, go ahead.
That's part of the issue, because the 1234 lot and the 1250 lot would both be lots that have that potential on it, but it wouldn't be the whole lot of either one of those, probably.
There's 3 different tax maps involved with our property.
Right.
Okay.
There's also the neighbor who's requesting as well on Plank Road.
Yeah, 1265.
Right, right.
I mean, we can draw up a potential schematic of which lots and then, you know,
Yeah, it would be
bring that
it
back
would
to the
help,
committee to
yeah.
take a look at that. I mean, we like to look at, let's rezone a parcel, then halfway through this piece, now you're dealing with half this zoning and half that zoning. We do have it in spots, but I think it's easier.
It's messy.
Yeah, it gets messy than just rezoning a parcel. So, you know, we can work with the Smiths in the off week and kind of, if you're not looking at all of it, what would make sense maybe with what, you know, is sewerable now and what those parcels tie with, and kind of come back with a sketch that, whether the group is supportive of that or
That split
something.
zoning is what that's the mess that we were dealing with on Empire Boulevard on that one property where the guy wants to put the townhouses in, Mr. Bardart, where half the property was zoned R120, the other half was zoned LaSalle's Landing.
Yep, it would be
That was
safe
the
to
mess.
assume, Jim, that you have definitely
Similar
instructed
with-
us into this, how bad split zoning is. I don't think any of us are going to recommend it
That's
at
what
this
you're
point.
dealing
That's the Melly property. They zone 500 feet off of Empire Boulevard, and now you've got the front half is one zone, the back half is something else, and it does create issues just trying to implement that later on. So
That happened in.
our suggestion is, at least if you're going to propose to rezone it, let's rezone it by the parcel, not some, you know, arbitrary block, you know, kind of in the midst of that. So we can come up with a sketch or a subset of that and then share that with the group and then, you know, come back with a recommendation at your next meeting if that
And that makes sense.
makes sense. Does that sound good to the group for tonight? Okay. So we'll reach out to you, you know, offline and look at, you know, looks like the group may be supportive of a subset of those parcels, so we may look to work with you of what makes sense out of those parcels, your parcels, their parcels, and then come back with at least kind of highlighted sketch. The committee can look at that and you know, have something concrete to hold on to, take a look at. They can drive around the property in the meantime, and we need to schedule our next meeting. That'll be at the end of this agenda, but once we have that next meeting, we'll share it with you as well. So,
We appreciate the consideration.
Very good.
okay. We'll show this one is held for now.
All right. We'll be in touch.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Good night. All right, finally.
All right, then our last rezoning request, which I believe actually they were our guests on 12/25/2020 as well, was Peter Vars,
Jerry Goldman.
and Jerry Goldman. Ooh, it's
There they are.
chugging on me here. There we go.
That's it.
Jim, you want to tee it up a little bit?
Yeah, to give you a little history, I'm sure Peter will embellish that as best he can. At one time, this property actually was zoned general business. It accommodated similar uses that you would have seen at Panorama Plaza, any type of retail, any type of restaurant activity. The town board was getting concerned that it wanted to have an office complex setting on Panorama Trail, and it did not allow for a lot of office space, but the general business zone allowed for things such as car dealerships and that kind of thing. And they didn't really want to see Panorama Trail turn into West Henrietta Road. Sorry, Roland, but that is actually the reality of the situation. So as a result, they actually rezoned this property from general business to limited industrial at one time. And Peter's going to talk a little bit about what's been going on over there over the last year or so since last we met, because a lot has taken place since the last time we talked to each other. And then talk a little bit about the fact that, in essence, they would like to rezone the front portion of this property, and he'll show you what portion, back to general business, because they have users now that are more compatible with the general business zone than a limited industrial type use at the intersection of Panorama and their new road. So with that, Peter and Jerry, if you'd like to jump in and let the committee know what you're thinking, that'd be a big help.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And as you mentioned, Jerry Goldman's with me also, and he'll have a few comments to add when I'm finished. And for everybody here, yeah, welcome back, I guess, to comprehensive planning in a post-COVID world. My name is Peter Vars with BME Associates. Just a little history on this property. The Panorama Park area is a total of about 55 acres. Going back to about 2015 or so, Dutch Summer started assembling these properties. They're actually made up of 4 parcels, or they were 4 independent parcels. There was the frontage parcel, which is the main reason, it's the purpose of our being here this evening, which it was going to be the site of the Hilton hotels that were approved by the planning board under the industrial zoning back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then there was 2 other parcels. One was, I'm going to say, excess lands of Thermo Fisher, Nalgene Corporation. There were remaining lands along Route 441 that were actually owned by E.J. Del Monte. They were leftover lands from where they've done their Marriott on the other side of 441 when the state went through and claimed their right-of-way. And then the last parcel is the former Camp Hakamo site. So those properties got assembled together, and back in 2018, 2019, the owner applicant approached the town about developing a business park. And there were some initial discussions about the zoning of the property. But at that time, the direction we received was, well, let's develop the project per its zoning, and let's wait on any potential zoning changes until we possibly have a general feel for what we may want to do. So in 2019, the planning board approved a business park to be known as Panorama Park on this 55 acres. It was approved for up to 350,000 square feet of total building space on 9 separate lots, and went through a complete seeker review, traffic studies, the whole EPOD permits, the whole requirements of the town of Penfield. And subsequently, they proceeded with developing the property. If you're familiar with it, we're right on Panorama Trail. We have about 400 feet of frontage. We're bounded to the north by the Popeyes restaurant. Panorama Trail to the east. The 441 is to our south with the westbound on-ramps. And then ultimately to the west, you have the Allens Creek Valley neighborhood and the Linden Estates Mobile Home Park. The roadway has been constructed, as you can see on the map that Doug has brought up. That roadway is in all the way up to the top of the hill. That's perfect, Doug, thank you. You can see on this aerial what is the first building. That first building was developed back in 2019. And then just what we say down the hill and to the right, that is the Simutech building. That's while it was being constructed, but if you go out there today, that building is built and occupied. So what's important about that building is that building, that lot, creates the western boundary of the lands we're looking to rezone. Back in February of 2019, I believe it was the last time you met, we had provided a letter to Zach Nersinger at the time with the exhibit to request consideration of rezoning of what is 7.5 acres of what we call the Panorama Trail frontage. That 7.5 acres is bounded by the park road that was built and the Simutech lot. And the reason, thank you, Doug, yeah, the shaded area you see there. The reason for this request is that the owner applicant is starting to receive inquiries about the use of the property, and they are more in line with the general business zone. One thing to point out of that 7.5 acres, it's not all developable land. If the southern portion of it, kind of where you see the trees, thank you, Doug, that's where the stormwater management facility is located for the overall property. So we're really looking at a development footprint area of just under 5 acres in that general area there. The rezoning of the property to general business, we believe, makes a lot of sense. If we can expand out on this drawing, you'll see that rezoning that frontage to general business actually is consistent with the zoning along Panorama Trail South. It's zoned general business to Popeyes, to the other frontage businesses along Panorama Trail, all the way up to Panorama Plaza, across the street, Home Depot, the car dealerships, and even to the south side of Route 441, those properties there. So this would not be an anomaly in the zoning. If anything, it would be consistent. And last thing I will say is that when we submitted this back in February, it was because the owner applicant was starting to receive inquiries and wanted to move this process forward. Obviously, we all had to pause for the past year, but as things have started opening up again, they're actually seeing renewed interest in the area. And thus, through some initial meetings we had with town staff, it was identified that we would come here, meet with you, put this proposal in front of you, explain it to you, and hopefully have you recommend the rezoning such that we could possibly move forward with such an application. And at this time, I'll let Jerry Goldman add any further comments. Oh, you're muted, Jerry.
Jerry, you're muted, I think.
I will now unmute.
There you go.
There you go.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I appreciate everything that Peter has said. I'll just add a few extra words relative to this. The frontage area, as Peter pointed out, had been zoned general business. Since the construction of the Simutech building, this property in the front is kind of isolated from anything further up the hill. If you know, Allens Creek Valley is quite a ways away from us and actually is screened from this by the industrial uses. Frankly, we think that light industrial uses along this frontage is probably inconsistent with what the town's development pattern is along this portion of Panorama Trail. As Peter indicated, the property owners have received interest in taking a look at this property, but Most people who would look to develop general business property will shy away from property which is zoned light industrial because they're uncertain of what that zoning process would be and what it would take and how much time it would take and everything else to get a property appropriately rezoned or zoned for general business use. To that extent, what we're looking to do is not necessarily make this shovel ready, as that term has been used, but at least zoning ready for us to be able to appropriately market this property for general business type uses consistent with everything else along the Panorama Trail corridor, both north and south of the 441 Expressway. So as we understand it, the process that we would be undertaking is the visit that we have here with the Comprehensive Plan Committee, and we appreciate your putting us on the agenda and giving us the opportunity to talk. And then we can proceed at that point with a rezoning process with the town board of this property, which entails review by the town board initially, review by the planning board, coming back to the town board for a public hearing. So it's not a completed process, but you as a comprehensive plan committee clearly are the first step of that process in order to be able to appropriately market this property for use that's consistent with other uses in the Panorama Trail corridor. So with that, we're looking for a recommendation this evening, if we can get it, so that we can start processing the rezoning application and the rezoning process. If you have any questions, obviously Peter and I are available to answer them. Town staff is well aware of what we are doing and what our proposal is. So I guess in a way I'll turn it back to Jim and Mark and see if you had any initial comments before the comp plan committee as a whole.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. One comment I'd like to make is Peter had noted, they have spent a lot of time with staff talking about this. Could you just elaborate a little bit on the issue of the restrictions associated with car dealerships, automotive repair, that type of thing at that particular location?
Yes, Jim. And it is called out in the letter that we provided to the town dated May 4th. Is that the applicant agrees that they would not pursue any auto dealership use on the property, even though it is permitted in the GB zone, such that if we are able to move forward to the town board, that they would accept a condition of rezoning, being that no auto dealership use would be allowed on the property.
Yeah, the parcel is not well situated for that type of use either. So to that extent, that condition is something which is clearly acceptable to the applicants.
Thank you. Committee, any questions, comments?
Just a question about entering and leaving for anybody utilizing a business there. Where would they access? How would they get in? How would they get out? How would it be safe?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. The point being is access to and from the property has fully been vetted as part of the planning board review process in 2019, which also occurred under the seeker process. A complete traffic study was prepared for the development. It was reviewed by both, well, I should say the town of Penfield, Monroe County, and New York State Departments of Transportation, such that the access plan has been approved, and the access plan has actually been constructed. The access to and from the site is 2 points of access. One point of access, it will continue to use Panorama Creek Drive and its signalized intersection with Panorama Trail South. The driveway to the west of Popeyes, thank you, as you can see on that aerial, has been built and has been approved, and that provides access into the park. You can see there is a road stub left just to the east there. Yep, just to the east of the cursor there, or right of the cursor, which provides access into the parcel. In addition, and it has been constructed, yes, thank you, awesome. That is the second point of access that's been provided into the property. It's just south of Popeyes, as you can see. This access provides left turns in and right turns into the property. But as you can see in the photo, the only exit move is a right turn out to go southbound on Panorama Trail South. So thus anybody going northbound would go out to Panorama Creek Trail and use the signal there. So the access has been approved and has been constructed, and that is how you would access in and out of the parcel.
And we have no plans to do anything else in terms of access. Having been fully vetted and reviewed by DOT, we understand that even if we wanted to, we probably are not looking at any changes relative to that because it went through a fair amount of analysis.
There'd be no future curb cut off of Panorama Trail. They would be off of this access drive that Doug showed or Panorama Park. So any business, any retail, whatever they had would access off that internal drive, and there would be no curb cut.
Yeah, so my
graded
question
out
would
on
be
Panorama.
is the traffic study was done as light industrial, and so is the study robust enough to handle the
is.
increased traffic of a commercial?
Yeah, because originally, and Peter can go further, when they came in, we did a very conservative, actually a 300,000 square foot traffic study for that much development. And based on how they're building out, we looked at two-story buildings, multi-story. All of their development so far have been, Simutech is kind of a 1.5, or, you know, a portion of it is 2 stories high. Peter, I think we chatted the other day, and you said it'd be 150,000 or 175,000 is probably the maximum they're going to get out of this property, even though the traffic study was done for initial 300,000.
Correct. So the planning board, when they granted overall preliminary approval to the park, which included the traffic study, that was based on 350,000 square feet of total space. And it was analyzed as flex space having an office component just on the 55 acres. So that results basically an average of 40,000 square feet per acre. The first 2 buildings that have been developed have totaled 55,000 square feet on just under 10 acres. So the development density that's actually occurring out there is 5,700 square feet per acre. So we're well below the thresholds of anything that was analyzed within the studies. Thus, this change to the general business zoning would not upset the traffic study. The other thing is what we're required to do with every application we make on this park to the planning board is we update the traffic data. In other words, we say this proposed use will generate this amount of traffic. We add it to what's already been there because there were thresholds established based on that traffic study as to what trip generations can be allowed within the park. So point is, the planning board and through staff monitor that with each and every application that comes in to be sure we're staying in line with the traffic study and other development thresholds that were established.
So this would actually be, in our world of most intense zoning, limited industrial is the most intense we have. GB offers you some other opportunities, retail. We would look this to be a downgrade from what the limited industrials are most intense. This would be a slight downgrade from that. It just allows them other opportunities along that frontage. Obviously, if they're looking at retail, you're next to Popeyes, whether we got a Burger King next door, McDonald's, or whomever. I don't know, what they're going after, but I think they're looking for more of the aesthetic look along the frontage, where a limited industrial, you got more loading docks, which is up in the back, and some of that. So I think is where they shared is to kind of dress it up along the front end, you know, a GB would get, you know, a more dressy retail look to the front of the plaza and along Panorama Creek, and then in the back, if you've got, you know, trucks and loading docks and stuff like that, kind of keep that stuff up in the back, so. Staff, we've looked at it, and it seems to make some sense, but obviously wanted to see if this group was supportive of it. And if there's
Makes
any-
perfect sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect
I
sense.
agree.
Roland? Sorry not to call you out, but everybody else kind of chimed in. So.
What kind of businesses, if I may ask, have made inquiries lately?
We're not as much on the contract end of it, Roland, but my sense of it is it would be something which would be compatible with the corridor. We don't really have specific information on any particular user at this point.
Right, okay. Thank you.
So it sounds like, I'd say usually we go with consensus, but it sounds like it's, Roland, if you're in favor, it sounds unanimous on this one, at least on the
I am.
Yep.
the committee members present, so.
Yep.
Yep.
So with that, we'll take it as a support for GB for rezoning of those 7.5 acres. We'll document it in our minutes, and obviously it'll reflect in our document, and then that'll give you gentlemen an opportunity to start talking to the town board and see where they would, if they're looking to or willing to entertain this next.
Okay?
Great. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.
Thank you very much.
So that's our rezonings for the evening and our guests. I think as we're getting to 8:42, we won't jump into further stuff with the document. I think the next order is to look at what do we want to schedule our next meeting as. Some of our setup is changed and different, so our nights of the week have gotten much busier. PCTV, many thanks to PCTV, but with this, every meeting in town is held in this room at this setup. With watershed, we used to be in the back, transportation, we were in other parts of the building. So I've kind of got a list of dates that are available. So we can kind of run through those, but I think now that we've kind of started some momentum, whether we want to target later this month, is that too soon? Like we can go, I think, as early as June 22nd, which if we're keeping with a Tuesday, I know this group, we've typically been Tuesdays, and I guess I can back up and say is Tuesday still the best day, and is 7 to 9 still the best
It works for me.
option
Yeah,
for
works for
everybody?
me.
So
Let's
the
say
next,
stay on it and get it done.
that's kind of what we,
Another pandemic.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I
Kind of
feel
what
like
we
we've
look at
got
is-
ground to make up, so if we
we're
could.
back and get some momentum going, so
Yeah.
June 22nd, I think, is our next option, checking with the PCTV gentlemen that they can work for them. This room is available if that works for this group. I looked at the 29th, that's a backup date for the high school graduation. PCTV is busy with that, so then that would throw us in, we could either go to Thursdays and some other days of the week, but if we want to stick with Tuesday,
22nd's fine for me.
22nd
Works for me.
Yeah,
Is that good for
22nd's, 22nd's good.
I'll let you know.
okay. And then obviously, we'll share with the other ones that are not here tonight. There was, Chris Whipple, Matt Rich, said they could not come this evening, but are looking to carry on with the group. And Heidi Rasmussen, thank you. We'll share with them as well for the 22nd. We'll keep this format through Zoom. If you want to be here, obviously, those are here tonight, thank you. You're welcome to
It is nice to see live bodies here.
keep coming back in this format. We do sanitize, we do have protocols. You all had to get through the front door tonight, so. But we'll keep with this format. Those that want to continue on Zoom are able to, come in through Zoom. We'll, continue this format as well. And then, obviously, if we have guests, that helps to bring them in as well, so.
We're going to have you all walk through a spray booth before you go on site.
It seems like that's the least of the indignities. I
I was going to say, after the last year, that's a cake. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pleasure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So do
would-
we want to try to book the next two? I'm just
Yeah,
asking the
that's
group.
Yeah, if we
I
want
mean,
to look ahead as
That's a
the,
good question.
so then, we've got June 22nd. Once we get into July, I don't know how soon we want to go. The week of July 6th, but that's in 4th of July week, which I think will be
Yeah,
tough.
July 6th, that won't work for me.
Okay.
That's asking a lot.
So then I think we jump to July 20th, I think was, I'm on a Tuesday. Doug?
Yep, July 20th.
July
Yeah, it works for me.
20th, I think, was the next available evening.
That would work for me, I think.
Okay. Now, I know they said, I think I got a P here, that's a possibility, so pencil that one in. I think PCTV had to confirm a few things, but that was a possibility for them. They said they could do the 22nd, which is a Thursday of that,
Yes.
of that week.
Zoning board's the third.
We don't have zoning board,
July
on
22nd.
Yeah.
July 22nd.
No, I
Normally
can
would
do
have
that
been
day
planning
too.
board, but during July and August,
Okay.
the planning board doesn't combine. planning,
So
public hearing work
we'll
session.
target, right now, we'll do June 22nd, and then we'll target July 20th.
Yep, but
If-
I mean, if you need to back up for July, the 22nd works for me.
Then
I
we'll
don't
do
know
the
anybody else.
22nd if the
Yeah,
20th doesn't
either
work out.
is okay at this point.
Okay.
We'll
So-
try and get some materials together for you for that June meeting
See-
that we talked about, the rezonings, that if you can get a chance, go out and take a look at the property. If you want us, yeah, I'd be happy to go out with you if you want me to go out with you.
So we'll
to
send
do
out the
that.
aerial photos, your homework between now and then. We're going to send you the aerial photo of the Morse property. The hill, we'll give you the elevations, so you can see the topo of that. We'll show you and come up with some parcel layouts for the Smith property, and show you what potential parcels, if the rezone was that, we'll send you those. And then as well as, I know we've been working on economic development, we may have one other section, so we'll send you those reading materials ahead of time, so you
For
can.
the second property where the second request, we didn't get a chance to ask if it was okay to go and look at the property.
They don't own that property, but
They own-
you can see a lot of it.
They own most of it, so we'll verify which property is not, he's
Oh, I-
talking the Gary Smith property. Gary
Yeah.
Smith owns most of the corner.
But I thought you were talking about the one to the west of Gary Smith's property that was also at
There's
16.
one.
There were several. They did send in a letter. I'm sorry, I meant to digitize it. I have it.
Yeah, no worries. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
where it's okay for us to go and look versus,
We'll-
I don't
we'll
want to
ver-
get in trouble.
No, and we'll verify ahead, and
Yeah.
we do the same with the planning board. Actually, when they make application, we sign them, have them sign a form saying, you authorize the
okay.
planning board, conservation
Can you
board
go
to
to
walk
those
your property at any time.
Unless
This
you want
isn't
to do
quite that
another
formal.
field trip in a van, I mean, that's an option too.
That is an option.
We'll verify that,
Well,
obviously.
Actually, it's not an option right
I was
now.
gonna say.
Yeah,
We're not putting several bodies into one vehicle.
No, probably can't.
The
It can't be
Smiths-
6 feet
the
apart.
Smiths
Well,
own-
caravan then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Smiths own most of that. I think the one property right on Plank Road, they don't own. They were in part of that
Yeah,
letter,
that's
so I would
That's the
assume,
one I
but
was thinking of right there.
we'll verify.
Yeah,
in
if
the
you
meantime.
have the aerial with the roads and the outline where we can go, because I won't drive onto the property, but I want to park and be able to kind of take a
Yeah,
look.
And the former Curran property, you've probably seen it at 250 and Plank. There's kind of a metal barn there at the corner. You can pull into that piece. The Smiths own that. We'll verify with them.
They'll let you walk
Get
on
them on
that
the
property
record
to
that
see
you
the
can
other
walk their
one.
property.
Yeah.
and
Okay, cool.
Let them know, so.
Yeah.
We'll do those two maps, we'll verify those locations, and then I say we'll send out some of the verbiage for, now we're getting into the second half of the document, similar to what we did before. We'll send you that to read ahead of time, and then we'll come into the next meeting, we'll go back through the rezoning pieces, and then we'll start working our way down through the document and chipping away at it.
Actually, I've been through this 5 times now. I'm kind of surprised that more people haven't come to us and say, we want our property rezoned. Back in the other processes, we had people standing in line saying, oh, we want this, we want that. And a lot of it didn't make any sense, obviously, but I'm really surprised. We've only had 5 or 6 people come in and talk to us about rezoning their property. And most of them, and I think you agree, because you have agreed to that, it made good sense to do it in the cases that they did. These last 2, we got to wrestle through and figure out what is the appropriate zoning and what's the appropriate density and that kind of thing for it.
Yeah, we saw your eyebrows go up, Jim, when he talked about 4 floors. I'm like, okay,
Oh.
yeah.
But is it possible to get a Google view of it?
You could do Google, or the other thing I'll bring up is I'll get into pictometry, because I can.
And I'm not going to keep you
Yeah,
guys
because
here
I mean,
later
the
than
point
have
you
to
made
be,
about
but-
the property owners up above, again, if they're not going to want to look directly into an apartment building.
Absolutely not.
And Jim shared the property that's the Howitt property down next to K2 Brewery. As you go in there, the town board was very judicious on how they looked at it, and you're looking down at a property from people who were 100 feet above, and they're looking down, and they wanted to know what the sight lines were, and so let alone looking straight into
For the
now an
roofs.
apartment building or something across the way that
Right.
now is in your
Oh,
view.
excellent.
They had a lot of concerns, and, we do
think
require sight lines
I think
and
Mr. Morris
profiles.
really didn't know what he wanted to do. I think
That was my take
That's
on it
part of
too.
the
He
issue.
feels like
probably has no idea on the
he wants a blank check
fiscal
is what he's looking
costs of
for,
it
you
too.
know.
'Cause it-
It's like everybody, if you ask for the world and get what you get, but, I think to share with him some reality to know that, again, it's not my decision, even if the committee recommends LaSalle's Landing, it's going to go to a further board's review, but just knowing that Jim's 41
it
years
seems
of
like it would be
experience is,
an expensive property to develop with
expensive
that
to build.
retaining wall and
it's going to be expensive to
whatever
build.
access
it
they're
will
going to
be.
require for Empire Boulevard.
You start to fight against, as you go taller, obviously now you need more parking spaces, so you don't have that big of a property,
Right.
so now
So,
you.
yeah,
Oh, that's,
I was shocked at how small a piece of, 2.9 acres. I thought he was talking like 12 acres, 15 acres, something like that.
no.
Yeah.
No, I remember we looked at this property.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we looked at LB, because I think this committee was concerned about the height, so I think we looked at a two-story maximum. If you did a two-story building on it,
You
and some
blow that
parking.
Well, I think we
Bring it in
talked a lot
closer.
about
I'm
the
looking
buffer
at the
houses
back
in the
portion.
back. That's
Yep,
what-
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
focus, yeah. The house
So
in
it's
the
not
back.
that bad of a grade, actually.
It goes up, I mean, it's just
I
hard
thought
to
it went up like
see
this.
here, but I can.
Steps,
Yeah.
so.
You know,
so
I can see
it's-
it.
I mean,
yeah.
it's a pretty sharp grade right here along
Right.
Empire Boulevard, but this is at a lower area down here.
Right.
Because this is all one property, these were built sort of into the hill.
That's right.
So it's flat along Empire Boulevard as you come in here, but then it grades
It
up to here.
rises.
And then even along the backside of these buildings, it's a little harder to see,
goes
but,
up,
it goes
yeah.
up right
Yep.
back behind them. But even between this area and here, there's a slope this way, north-south, there's a slope in addition to the east-west
So he
slope.
would still have to
So there's a
cut.
step up to here, but there's also a step going up both of these, but these are sort of built into the hill.
See, the big problem I see for them is, I mean, if it was a one-story building at grade on Empire Boulevard, it's not a big deal. But if they're talking 3 or 4 stories, they're not gonna have any buffer between them and the properties behind them. That's the big
neighbor's going to
issue.
be looking at the roof.
They're right.
If they
Yeah,
do a gabled roof.
They'd be
something
hoping
like
to
that,
look at the roof.
yeah.
They might be looking at somebody's bathroom or something at the rate they're done.
Yeah.
Well, you were saying 35 to 40 feet. I mean, you look at a four-story
Two-story,
building.
a two-story
four-story
building is 35 feet.
Yeah, with roof, or if you do a flat roof building, you're 10 feet per story at a minimum. You're at
Yeah, I mean,
40
nowadays
feet,
it's
so now
closer
you're-
to 11, but yeah, it's.
I mean, if you're doing retail, you're at 12 or more on a first floor, and then you go up from there.
So, I mean, if you look at the property and how it's structured, even it doesn't pass the common sense test that you're going to put a large-scale it's just, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, you just look at it. It looks perfect for the right type of a retail that would be, or a set of doctor's offices that might have slightly less need for, I mean, there's certainly uses the property could be valuable, and it's on a road that's got good traffic patterns, so it just doesn't seem like the common sense factor is being plugged in there.
Right.
I mean, unless I'm missing
So,
something
and-
here.
And in many cases, a lot of these developments too, is they do, put the parking closer to the road, Empire Boulevard, because you want to reduce the noise of, the folks living there, and the houses are going to generate significantly less noise than Empire Boulevard is. So I don't foresee him putting an apartment building right along the road here. It is going to sort of be tucked
If we
into
go down the hill a little bit, on the other side of the
Well,
street.
they built basically at every property line as they could.
Yeah, but you're talking about 2 acres.
But you had no
You'd see
neighbors
them
to worry
pushing,
about either.
you'd see them pushing the building here to have the parking along the frontage.
Right.
Especially if there is some sort of first floor commercial user. You're going to want parking along the front of the building. Maybe if there is underground parking, you're going to have some form of side entrance. But the building's going to be, in this area. They're going to clear this area out, level it out,
Right.
and put the building here.
They'll probably level out
Closer
the houses-
to,
houses,
and the rear setback tends to be less than the front setback.
Yeah, but I mean, he kind of told you what his hope was to get those 4 stories so that people could have views both of the water and of the city. So
Yeah, I don't see it ever happening.
I don't either, but I'm saying he did kind
of.
of tell us what he was shooting for. But Donna asked, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is where you're going to park all the cars for
Right.
all those units.
Right. I mean, you look at that 98-unit complex that Daniele family built. They've got parking underneath, but they also have parking adjacent to it outside for extra overflow parking. that parking underground is simply for the owners of the units or the tenants. But if you have visitors coming, or if you have anybody coming or going for deliveries, they're all outside.
Or if, in this case, if he's talking about mixed use, or he's got a coffee shop or a restaurant or whatever.
How much can you fit there, right? It's only almost, it's not even 3 acres.
I mean, LaSalle's Landing may still afford them some options and opportunities, but just a little reality.
Yeah,
I don't think that 4 stories, 1, you can accommodate enough parking, or 2, the impacts to the surrounding properties seems a bit tough.
What's your
but-
parking code per unit here?
2 spaces per residential unit,
Oh, 2, okay.
And then 1 covered if you're in an MR.
and 1
Yes,
covered.
It's MR, yeah, 1 covered.
So whether
So-
that's under the building covered, or an outside carport, or
Garages.
garage.
And if you look,
Then
if you look at
add to
the,
that, like if there's some mixed use where there's some retail in there as well, that changes the parking dynamic, right? Depending on the
Right.
type of what it is, you need more or less spaces, right?
Yep.
one of the guidelines is you start reading this document for the LaSalle's Landing district, they talk about, not impeding, views and vistas for residents in the area.
That's my
This
other
is totally
question. Do
contrary to what
those
you're trying to
houses
do.
Up there, Jim, do they have a view of do those houses have a view of the bay today?
I don't know, but we'll find out. You'll know before the next meeting.
Because I can tell you, if that's again, I know that will not ultimately be the decision-making for the town planning board, but if you're obscuring those views, then you're gonna have
I'm
those-
betting that they probably
Most of them have
don't.
views of trees.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. what
I'm
it
betting
is,
they
'cause
don't see the bay because,
I have been in the backyard of this property because they do have a pond back there, and we did have to do a pond inspection as part of our MS4 compliance. I have been back there. It was during the spring in a leaf-on condition, and there is a fair amount of trees behind this property at least. Unfortunately, most of those trees are not on their property, so if
you'd want to preserve that tree line if you could.
if he did come in,
obviously.
at least to maximize, so they do actually, this 48 does have most of the trees.
Can
on
you
their
zoom
property.
out a little bit? I'd like to see, as it relates to the bay, how they fit in even more.
I think those trees offer
I
a visual
can't
buffer
imagine
to
they have
Empire
any view of the
Boulevard,
bay.
and the cars.
Yeah,
and
there's
traffic
I mean,
and-
I can see there's no bay view from there.
It's not so much even just having a view of the bay, it's really just having a view. I mean, just having something that's not blocked,
Having a view
just have a
that's not
wall in your
in-
Well, if you
backyard.
cut those trees down and there's nothing there, what they have is a lovely
Of a
view of
building.
Empire Boulevard, which I'm sure is equally not.
Actually,
Optimal.
I mean,
Trees
the
offer, sound
peaks in
buffer as
here
well
are only
with the leaf-on
3, I
condition.
mean, it does get back up to 400 by the road, but the peaks of the high areas of the
And
ridges
you
here
just-
don't get much
You
above
don't
360.
just have the view of the.
I'd be shocked if they
sort
had a
of-
view,
it's
but I'd
not
like to go
just the
see.
trees. I mean, and first of all, they would have to be evergreen trees or something to be protected. But you've got the increased noise, which, if you live that close to Empire Boulevard, you can't really complain too much about noise. But you've also got kind of the light pollution of those buildings, unless there's, 30-foot tall blue spruces packed side by side.
I can see 2-story buildings. I
Yeah.
can't see anything over 2 stories there. I really can't. And they might have, you might
not
even
with a
see the roof
30-foot
line if it's a
elevation, that's-
pitched
yeah.
roof. But to throw 4 stories in front of somebody's backyard,
And we
I
don't
don't
allow
see that.
wall packs or anything like that, but they're going to be required, I mean, if they are.
They'll
doing
have
some
lighting in
form
the
of commercial,
parking areas.
They're going to have some lighting in the parking other areas, whether they're, 20-foot bollard type with Cobra heads, hopefully LED style with cutoffs and things like that, but there's still going to be some lights.
Right.
I mean,
Especially if they're
mixed,
doing-
if they go LaSalle's Landing, so let's talk about it. I mean, could they put a gas station there? Could they put
no,
could they-
actually, they couldn't.
So you see where I'm
There
going?
are
I mean,
certain-
could they put a car wash there? Is there
No,
something they could put
no,
that would
those
be
kinds of-
disruptive?
See,
to-
that's the other issue. LaSalle's Landing District was designed to be a point of destination where you had restaurants, you had apartments, you had townhouses, you had shopping if it was brought in. It wasn't designed to be an automotive repair area or service area. As a matter of fact, people are looking at putting different types of like convenience stores, that kind of thing. That would go, but you can't do it with gasoline service. So nobody's showing any interest now because you can't provide gasoline. So it's a point of destination area. And I don't know how many of you have been around a long time, and I mean a long time, but if you remember Empire Boulevard back in the 80s and the 70s, it was just a dumping ground, basically. I mean, every property down there was contaminated. Every property was being used for some use that's like American Roadways would pave, they'd bring their paving material down there and dump it at night. Wesley Paving, all those companies down there were just dumping stuff all night long. Well, we had nobody down there to watch them. We finally got rid of all those pre-existing non-conforming uses, and now you're starting to get uses in there that are drawing people to the area. Things like kayaking, canoeing, the parks, the residences, all that's so different from when I was starting to work here. And we don't want to see that go back. We have 2 pre-existing non-conforming car lots there that, at some point in time, we're hoping will go away. I mean, they can stay there as long as they want because they are pre-existing non-conforming, but they don't fit in with the character of that area anymore, so.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, yep. So the question then really remains is the commercial versus the multi, the LaSalle's versus the multi-tenant the right? Quite honestly, I'm struggling with it with only 2 acres. Multi-tenant just does not make sense to me with 2 acres.
If I were him, I'd be looking more at commercial type uses on that property. I mean, that's where he's gonna make money over the long haul.
I thought he bought it originally because he was gonna move the business across the street.
He sold the business.
Somebody bought out the.
Yeah, he doesn't own it anymore.
Yeah, somebody
But
put out
I'm
the metal
thinking,
roof
like, just as you said, George, I mean, he would have the ability to put a C-store there with gasoline if he were in a limited business zone. He could do a little strip mall there if he wanted to. Granted, I mean, it's not as easy to sell stuff from strip malls as it used to be, but it gives him almost a wider array of commercial uses than it does if he were to go to LaSalle's Landing.
I mean, it might be worth it, maybe one of you guys having a more heart-to-heart with him about, hey,
I'm thinking that may be the case. Now that we have a better feeling for what's in his mind in terms of, what he thinks he'd like to have there, I just don't think it's being realistic. I mean, it's just, there's not enough land. He's too close to the residences to the east. And he's just asking he's putting 5 pounds of sugar in a 3-pound bag, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think my instinct is that he's thinking of how much money can I make off of it, not really what
Absolutely.
do I want to do with it.
That's
So
right.
he's thinking of the end point of how much money I hope to make from this, and then backing into, well, now, what will generate that kind of money?
Right.
And so I think that he needs not only kind of a reality check in terms of what you can do, but a reality check in terms of what the financial gain from a small piece of property that size in that location is, regardless of how it's zoned.
And the thing is, if a company like Burn Dairy or, what am I thinking down there at the Atlantic and Creek there, Fast Track, one of those came in, they'd offer them oodles of money for that property, and they could do other things there besides that use if they wanted to. Give them tenancy of the site and, give them a long-term lease, they'd make a good chunk of money off that property.
But what would the town's feel be for zoning that to a more commercial versus a multi-tenant or a LaSalle's? I mean, I think he hasn't asked us for the commercial.
I think that's the way to
I'm not
go.
sure are any of the properties around that commercial? I thought that was.
Well, you've got right
it's-
across the street, you've got all commercial activity. Next to them is the senior home.
And at one point, Empire Boulevard, 500 feet on either side, was
Right.
zoned. We really just called it commercial.
Up until
C1.
1981, there was a 500-foot swath along both sides of Empire Boulevard that was just called commercial, which you could basically do whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
And that's how you got to things like, the Melly Brothers having their industrial complex there for the first 500 feet in, and then all of a sudden the rest of it behind them was R120. But you couldn't get to the R120 anymore to build housing because nobody wanted to go through an industrial complex to get there. So that was a problem. So you got to be careful.
Makes sense.
How you put that stuff together. That's why you don't cross zoning lines on the same property.
Yeah,
It's either residential or it's commercial, but it's not both.
yeah, because at one.
Yeah, good point.
At
That's it.
one point, it was just 500 feet on either side of Empire
What year was
Boulevard.
that,
This is 57.
Yeah. It all started in 57.
And really, it was in the mid-60s when they started looking at doing multi-residential around it.
Right.
and little areas were carved out, but it was still mostly, I mean, even
Well, yeah, you were
75
talking
here.
about that being a dumping ground. You guys probably don't know this, but the house I own was owned by the Millers. And so about half of my backyard, when you dig beyond the topsoil, is basically chunks of asphalt. That's how.
Would not surprise me at all.
That's how he leveled that property so that he could use it.
That's how all the lands on Empire Boulevard on both sides of the street ended up being that way, because that's what they did. They just kept, there were big ravines off the road.
Because what he did is he
They're all
had a
wetlands.
crumbling slope to one side of the property because that's the fill he had. I guess
Right.
they just dumped it in, filled it in. Yeah, and I didn't even know it. And we've actually removed 2 barrels that were.
This is why we created the Environmental Protection Overlay Districts.
I don't even want to know what's in the barrels.
Careful when you're digging in your backyard.
Don't say anything. You'll be the one cleaning it up.
Well, we're after our 9 o'clock hour, so in
Thank you so
respect to
much.
committee members, again, thanks for coming back.
It's great to have you.
Next scheduled meeting is June 22nd. Keep an eye out for emails. Whether Doug, myself, or Jim will be sending out stuff shortly back to the committee. Obviously, call us, email us whenever if need, have questions, comments, stuff in the meantime. So we will be concluding this meeting at 9:07 PM. Thanks, Roland, for sitting with us through Zoom,
Thanks, PCTV.
and thanks, PCTV.
Yep, thank you.